Welcome to this explainer, where we're diving into the strategy behind Seen by Chloe, a brand that's making some serious waves in the UK design market. And they're doing it with a whole lot of color.
I mean, think about it. For what feels like forever, it's all been about minimalism, right? Clean lines, neutral colors, you know the drill. Less is more. But let's be real. After a while, doesn't all that beige and gray start to feel a little, well, boring?
Well, it turns out you are definitely not alone. There's a big shift happening, and this one brand, Seen by Chloe, is riding that wave. They've basically built their entire business as this joyful rebellion against all of that minimalist fatigue. So, how did they pull this off? Well, first up, we have to talk about timing. Seriously, their launch during the pandemic, that wasn't an accident. It was a huge piece of the puzzle. The founder, Chloe McDonald, she's got this super interesting background. She was a high-level fashion buyer at Harrods, so, she has an incredible eye. Then 2020 hits. The pandemic gives everyone this weird pause, right? And she used that time and space to finally chase this dream she'd had forever, becoming an antique dealer. And her timing? Absolutely perfect. We were all stuck at home, staring at our walls, and suddenly craving spaces that felt more like us, more personal, more expressive. She basically called the perfect wave of post-minimalist energy.
All right, so let's get into the nitty-gritty of the brand's philosophy. What makes them tick? It all comes down to this core idea they call the joyful edit.
The joyful edit is basically the brand's DNA. It's this amazing collection of colorful, sometimes a little bit kitschy, vintage pieces. But, and this is the key, it's not just a random jumble of cool stuff. The founder calls it an instinctive yet considered mix. What that really means is they're throwing out the old rulebook. They're mixing different eras, different styles to create this totally unique vibe that feels alive and personal, not like you're walking through stuffy museum.
And you can totally see the strategy in how they've set up their products. Look at this. A huge chunk is art and accessories. That is so smart because it means you don't have to shell out for a huge piece of furniture to get a piece of that joyful vibe. It makes the whole aesthetic way more accessible. Oh, and see that last little slice? Proprietary lines. That's them designing their own stuff. This is critical because when you're dealing with one-off vintage finds, having your own products gives you a steady stream of on-brand inventory.
Okay, so we've talked about what they sell, but the how is just as crucial. The way the business is actually built is what gives them this massive competitive edge. They're not just a shop. They're this cool hybrid, part curator, part creator. Okay, this chart right here is fascinating because it really lays out the whole landscape. On one side, you have your traditional antique dealers, right? They're all about historical accuracy, provenance, the deep history of an object. On the other side, you've got your big modern retailers who are all about selling a ton of stuff, usually minimalist at a good price. And then, smack in the middle, you've got Seen by Chloe. Their main focus isn't history and it isn't volume. It's aesthetic curation. They've found this incredible sweet spot, giving you the uniqueness of vintage, but with the strong, clear vision of a modern design brand. It's kind of the best of both worlds.
So how do they get all this great stuff? Well, it's powered by this really clever sourcing strategy. The founder calls it relationship banking. Instead of just transactions, she builds real, long-term trust with vendors. She even wears this iconic vintage F1 jacket to fairs so people remember her. And that's not just a style choice. It's a business tactic. It gets her first dibs on the best pieces and even better prices. It's a huge advantage. Okay, but think about this for a second. If you're selling unique, often pricey vintage items online, how on earth do you get people to trust you? You can't just rely on 100 five-star reviews for the same product because every product is different. Right? So most brands, they use what we call social proof. That's peer reviews, star ratings, photos from other customers, you know the deal. Seen by Chloe, they go in a completely different direction. They build trust through something called curatorial authority. The whole idea is you don't need to trust 100 strangers if you can trust the expert taste of one person, the founder. A taste that's been backed up by the pros. And here is the perfect example of that in action. In 2024, Chloe McDonald was named one of just 25 rising stars by the super prestigious House and Garden magazine. That one single mention, that becomes what we can call the brand's press capital. It's this massive stamp of approval from an institution. It instantly justifies their prices, builds trust, and honestly, it's worth more than 1,000 random online reviews. All right, so the brand's got this powerful foundation. Now let's look at how they're actually scaling that instinct, moving from a lean online startup to a brand with a real physical footprint.
And they've been super smart and strategic about it. They didn't just rush out and rent an expensive storefront. They started with pop-ups all over London, a great way to test the waters without a ton of risk. From there, they set up an appointment-only showroom. Again, smart. It keeps costs down while letting them connect with really serious buyers. And now, the next huge step, a permanent home at the old cinema in Chiswick, which is a legendary spot for antiques. This is them planting their flag, for real.
But this growth brings up a huge question. The whole brand is built on Chloe's personal eye, her taste, her relationships. So how do you scale that? How do you take one person's gut feeling and turn it into a process that a whole company can follow as it gets bigger? Well, the answer, at least in part, takes us back to those in-house products we talked about. By spotting gaps in the vintage market, things they know their customers want but are hard to find, they can just design and make their own versions. This is a game changer. It gives them a reliable source of on-brand products, which is a lifesaver in the unpredictable antiques world, and bonus, the profit margins are way better. And that brings us to the final piece of this whole strategy, where they're headed next, because they're not just content with being a really cool shop. The big plan is to take all that curatorial authority they've built up and expand into services, specifically interior design. That new showroom in Chiswick, it's not just going to be a store. It's going to be the home base for a full-on design studio. They're making the leap from being an emporium that sells cool things to becoming a design authority that sells a complete vision. It's the ultimate endgame. So when you boil it all down, the big lesson from Seen by Chloe is this. In a super crowded market, having a strong, curated point of view isn't just about style. It's a seriously powerful business strategy. It's how you can stand out and build something that lasts. And that really leaves us with one final big question to chew on. As brands get more and more personal and we all crave that human connection, is a founder's unique expert taste becoming the ultimate, most defensible asset a company can have? Something to think about.